Gunshots cracked like thunder across the prairie as Zara Phillips ducked behind a water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs and the taste of dust bitter on her tongue. Dodge City, Kansas, in 1878 was no place for a woman alone, but she had run out of options months ago. "Come out with your hands up, Miss Phillips," Sheriff Buchanan's voice boomed across the town's main street. "We know what you did." Zara clutched her satchel tighter to her chest. Inside was everything she had left in the world, $300 that didn't belong to her, a change of clothes, and a locket containing the only picture she had of her parents. She had come to the West seeking a new beginning after her family's farm in Missouri had failed, leaving her orphaned and destitute. Instead, she'd found herself trapped in a web of desperation that had led to this moment. "I said come out." The sheriff's voice grew closer. The sound of spurs jingling nearby made Zara freeze. She looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun, broad-shouldered and lean. His face was shadowed beneath a well-worn Stetson, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in stubble and eyes that seemed to pierce right through her. "Might want to find better cover, madam," the stranger drawled quietly. "Sheriff's got deputies flanking the alley." "Who are you?" Zara whispered. "Name's Dawson Wade. Most folks call me Daw." He extended a gloved hand. "And unless you're aiming to spend tonight in a jail cell, I suggest you take my hand and run." Zara hesitated only a moment before grasping his hand. His grip was firm and warm as he pulled her to her feet. Without another word, he led her behind the general store, where a magnificent palomino stood waiting. "Can you ride?" Dawson asked, already mounting and extending his hand again. "Better than most men," Zara replied, taking his hand and swinging up behind him. Dawson's lips curved into a half-smile. "Then hold tight, Miss Phillips." The horse bolted forward just as Sheriff Buchanan rounded the corner, his pistol drawn. "Stop right there, Wade. That woman's a thief." Dawson spurred the horse harder, and they thundered out of town, leaving a cloud of dust and angry shouts behind them. As they rode into the open prairie, Zara found herself clinging to the stranger's back, the solid warmth of him the only certain thing in her world. The wind whipped her chestnut hair free from its pins, and she closed her eyes, feeling a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. "Why did you help me?" she shouted over the pounding of hooves. "The way I see it," Dawson called back, "a woman running from Buchanan's got good reason. That man's not known for his fair judgment." They rode for nearly an hour before Dawson slowed the horse to a walk, guiding the animal toward a small creek nestled in a grove of cottonwoods. As they dismounted, Zara's legs trembled beneath her, whether from the ride or the fear, she couldn't say. Dawson removed his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat, tied back with a leather cord. In the fading light, she could see his eyes were a startling blue, like the summer sky after a storm. "You want to tell me why the sheriff of Dodge City is calling you a thief?" he asked, leading his horse to drink. Zara lifted her chin. "Because I took money that wasn't mine." She expected judgment in his expression, but instead found only careful consideration. "Money from who?" "Gerald Whitaker. He owns the Silver Dollar Saloon." Dawson's eyes narrowed. "Whitaker's a snake, cheats at cards and worse. He hired me as a singer 3 months ago, promised good wages." Zara's voice tightened with bitterness. "Then he said I owed him for room and board. Each week I somehow ended up deeper in debt to him, no matter how many hours I worked. When I tried to leave, he said I belonged to him until I paid what I owed." Dawson's jaw tensed. "And the money you took, $300, what I earned and then some for the trouble." Zara met his gaze defiantly. "I'm not sorry for taking it." "Whitaker's in the sheriff's pocket," Dawson said. "Has been for years. That's why Buchanan's after you." So you believe me. I've known enough men like Whitaker to know how they operate. Dawson pulled a canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. Drink. We've got a ways to go before we're safe. As Zara drank, she studied the man who had risked himself for a stranger. His clothes were worn but clean, a simple cotton shirt, leather vest, and denim pants tucked into well-used boots. He wore a gun belt with what appeared to be a Colt revolver, but he didn't have the hard look of a gunslinger. "Where are we headed?" she asked, returning his canteen. "My ranch. It's about 20 miles north of here." "You're a rancher. Started with 10 acres and 3 cows 5 years ago. Now I've got 200 acres and a decent herd." He smiled slightly. "Nothing fancy, but it's mine." "And you're willing to harbor a fugitive?" Dawson's expression grew serious. "Miss Phillips, I've seen what happens to women who get caught in Whitaker's web. None of it's pretty." "You did what you had to." "Call me Zara," she said quietly. "And thank you." They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horse. Dawson spoke little, but Zara found comfort in his silence. It wasn't judgmental or tense, just the quiet of a man accustomed to his own company. As dawn broke across the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Zara spotted a modest ranch house nestled in a shallow valley. A small barn stood nearby, along with a corral containing several horses. "It's not much," Dawson said, following her gaze, "but it's home." "It's beautiful," Zara replied honestly. After months of living in a cramped room above a noisy saloon, the peaceful ranch seemed like paradise. As they approached, a large dog with shaggy brown fur came bounding toward them, barking enthusiastically. "That's Rusty," Dawson explained. "Don't worry, he's all noise." The dog circled the horse, tail wagging furiously as Dawson dismounted and helped Zara down. Her legs felt stiff after the long ride, and she stumbled slightly. Dawson's hand steadied her, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. "You must be exhausted," he said. "Come inside. I'll fix some breakfast and you can rest." The ranch house was simple but well kept. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a rough-hewn table and chairs at the other. 2 doors led off to what Zara presumed were bedrooms. "It's just me here," Dawson explained, as if reading her thoughts. "I hire hands during roundup and branding, but day to day, I manage alone." He moved around the kitchen with surprising efficiency, stoking the fire in the iron stove and setting coffee to boil. From a small pantry he produced bacon, eggs, and a loaf of bread. "You cook," Zara observed, taking a seat at the table. "A man living alone either learns to cook or starves," Dawson replied with a slight smile. "Though I won't claim it's anything special." As the aroma of coffee and frying bacon filled the small house, Zara felt some of the tension leave her body. For the first time in months, she felt safe. Over breakfast, Dawson explained more about his ranch. He had come west after the war with nothing but determination and the skills he'd learned growing up on his family's farm in Tennessee. "The war took my father and older brother," he said quietly. "Mother passed from grief not long after. There was nothing left for me there." "I'm sorry," Zara said. "I lost my parents to influenza 2 years ago. Our farm couldn't survive the drought that followed." "So you came west?" Zara nodded. "I had dreams of teaching school, but no one would hire a woman without references or connections. The saloon was a last resort." "And now?" Dawson asked. "What will you do now?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Zara knew she couldn't stay at Dawson's ranch indefinitely, but she had no clear path forward. If she returned to Dodge City, she faced jail or worse, being returned to Whitaker's employ. "I don't know," she admitted. "I hadn't thought beyond escaping. Dawson studied her for a moment. "You can stay here until you figure it out. I've got a spare room and I could use some help around the place. I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's fair exchange. You work, you stay." His blue eyes met hers. "And you'll be safe here. Buchanan rarely ventures this far from town, and when he does, I usually get warning." Zara wanted to refuse to maintain what little independence she had left, but practicality won out. "Thank you. I accept." After breakfast, Dawson showed Zara to the smaller of the two bedrooms. Though plain, with just a narrow bed, chest of drawers, and small window, it was clean and private, a luxury she hadn't known in too long. "Rest," Dawson said. "I've got chores to tend to. We can talk more about arrangements later." Alone in the quiet room, exhaustion finally overcame Zara. She collapsed onto the bed without even removing her boots and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke, the sun was low in the western sky. She had slept the entire day away. Embarrassed, she quickly washed her face in the basin provided, smoothed her rumpled clothing as best she could, and ventured out to find her host. Dawson was in the corral, working with a spirited young horse. Zara paused to watch him. His movements were patient, but firm as he guided the animal in circles with long reins. There was something captivating about the quiet confidence with which he handled the nervous horse, speaking to it in low tones she couldn't quite hear. When he noticed her watching, he tied off the reins and approached. "Sleep well, too well," Zara admitted. "I didn't mean to lie about all day. You needed it." He wiped his brow with a bandana. "Hungry." Over a simple supper of beans, corn bread, and coffee, they discussed how Zara could contribute to the ranch. Though she had grown up on a farm, her experience with cattle was limited. "I can cook, clean, mend," she offered. "I know kitchen gardens and preserving. I can learn whatever else you need." "That's more than enough," Dawson assured her. "Truth is, I've been neglecting the house something fierce since my last housekeeper left to get married 6 months ago." As the days passed, they fell into an easy rhythm. Zara rose early to prepare breakfast before Dawson headed out to work the cattle. While he was gone, she tackled the house, which had indeed been sorely neglected. She found satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos, scrubbing floors, washing linens, and organizing the pantry. In the afternoons, she often helped with outdoor tasks, feeding chickens Dawson kept for eggs, tending to a small vegetable garden that had been overtaken by weeds, and learning to care for the horses. Each evening, they shared supper and conversation, getting to know each other in small increments. Dawson, she discovered, was a man of unexpected depths. Though he had little formal education, he was well-read, with a small collection of books he treasured. He had a quiet humor that emerged when he was relaxed, and a thoughtfulness that showed in the way he considered his words before speaking. For his part, Dawson seemed surprised by Zara's resilience and determination. He never mentioned the money she had taken or questioned her decision to flee. Instead, he treated her with a respect she had rarely encountered from men. 2 weeks after her arrival, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in fiery hues, Zara found the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her. "Why did you really help me that day in Dodge City?" Dawson was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. "I had a sister," he finally said, his voice low. "Younger than me by 6 years. After our parents died, we tried to make it on our own back east, but times were hard. She took work at a place like Whitaker's." His hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "The owner promised to treat her right, said she'd just be serving drinks. 3 months later she was gone. Consumption, they said, but I knew better. She'd been worked to death and worse." "I'm sorry," Zara whispered. "When I saw you hiding from Buchanan, with that look in your eyes, the same look my sister had the last time I saw her. I couldn't just ride past." He turned to meet her gaze. "I couldn't save her, but maybe I could help you." Without thinking, Zara reached out and laid her hand over his. "You did." They sat in silence as darkness fell, neither withdrawing from that simple touch. The following morning, a rider approached the ranch. Dawson, who had been repairing a fence near the house, tensed when he spotted the dust cloud. "Get inside," he told Zara, who had been hanging laundry. "Stay out of sight until I call for you." Zara hurried into the house, her heart pounding. Through the window, she watched as a man in a deputy's badge rode up to Dawson. "Morning, Wade," the deputy called. "Been a while." "Deputy Miller," Dawson replied neutrally. "What brings you out this way?" "Sheriff's looking for a woman. Singer from the Silver Dollar who robbed Whitaker blind a few weeks back." Miller shifted in his saddle. "Dark hair, green eyes, goes by the name of Zara Phillips. Thought you might have heard something, being as you were in town that day." "Can't say I have," Dawson said evenly. "I don't get to town much these days. Ranch keeps me busy." Miller's eyes narrowed. "Mind if I take a look around? Sheriff's offering a reward." "I mind," Dawson said, his hand resting casually near his holstered gun. "Unless you've got a warrant. My land is my business." The deputy studied him for a long moment. "You sure you want to make an enemy of the sheriff over some saloon girl?" "I'm not making an enemy of anyone, just exercising my rights as a property owner." Miller spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Have it your way, Wade, but the sheriff's got a long memory." "So do I," Dawson replied coolly. "Safe ride back to town, deputy." Zara watched as the deputy turned his horse and rode away. She was still standing by the window when Dawson came inside. "He's gone," Dawson said, "but he'll be back with a warrant next time. We need to figure out what to do." "I should leave," Zara said, her voice tight. "I've brought trouble to your door." "No." Dawson's response was immediate and firm. "Running now would just confirm their suspicions. Besides, where would you go?" He was right, and they both knew it. Zara had no family, no friends she could turn to. The money she had taken, her money, earned through months of thankless work, wouldn't last long on the run. "Then what do we do?" Dawson ran a hand through his hair, thinking. "We need to deal with Whitaker directly. If we can get him to drop the charges, Buchanan will have no choice but to let it go." "And how do we do that?" "Whitaker would sooner see me hang than admit he was wrong." "Men like Whitaker have secrets," Dawson said grimly. "Things they don't want known." "We need leverage." The plan they devised was dangerous but simple. Dawson would ride into Dodge City to gather information, while Zara remained hidden at the ranch. If he wasn't back in 3 days, she was to take his best horse and ride north to Colorado, where she could lose herself in the growing mining towns. The morning Dawson prepared to leave, Zara found herself reluctant to let him go. In the weeks they had spent together, something had shifted between them, a growing warmth that neither had acknowledged but both felt. "Be careful," she said, handing him provisions she had packed for the journey. "Whitaker is dangerous." "I've handled worse," Dawson assured her, though his eyes were serious. "Keep Rusty with you. He'll warn you if anyone approaches." "I'll be fine," Zara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "It's you I'm worried about." Dawson hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek gently. "I'll come back, Zara. You have my word." The days of Dawson's absence were the longest of Zara's life. She kept busy with chores, tending to the animals and maintaining the house, but her thoughts were constantly with him. Each evening, she sat on the porch with Rusty at her feet, watching the road for any sign of his return. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, just as she was beginning to contemplate the possibility of fleeing north, she spotted a rider approaching from the south. Even at a distance, She recognized Dawson's straight-backed posture and the distinctive gait of his palomino. Relief flooded through her as she ran to meet him, Rusty bounding alongside. When Dawson dismounted, his face was grim but determined. "I found what we need," he said without preamble. "Whitaker's been skimming money from the Army contracts for supplying the nearby fort. He's been shorting the deliveries and pocketing the difference." "How did you discover this?" "Whitaker's former bookkeeper is dying of consumption in a boarding house on the edge of town." Man wanted to clear his conscience before meeting his maker. Dawson produced a leather portfolio. "He gave me these records of every transaction for the past 2 years, with notes on the actual deliveries versus what was billed. And this will be enough." "It's enough to send Whitaker to a federal prison for a good long while." Dawson's mouth curved in a humorless smile. "I've already sent copies to the commander at Fort Dodge. What happens now? Now we wait." The Army doesn't take kindly to being cheated, especially when it affects their supplies. They'll move quickly. They didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, a military wagon accompanied by soldiers arrived at the ranch. The officer in charge, a Captain Lewis, was polite but formal. "Mr. Wade, I'm here regarding the evidence you provided about Gerald Whitaker's fraudulent contracts." Dawson invited the captain inside. Zara, who had been preparing to hide, was surprised when Dawson asked her to join them. "Captain, this is Miss Zara Phillips. She has her own grievance against Whitaker." Captain Lewis listened intently as Zara explained how Whitaker had effectively held her in indentured servitude, withholding her rightful wages and forcing her to flee with what she had earned. "We've heard similar accounts from other women who worked at the Silver Dollar," the captain said when she finished. "It seems Mr. Whitaker has made quite a habit of such practices." "What about Sheriff Buchanan?" Dawson asked. "He's been hunting Miss Phillips on Whitaker's behalf." "Sheriff Buchanan has been relieved of his badge pending an investigation into his involvement in Mr. Whitaker's various enterprises." Captain Lewis's expression was grim. "We have reason to believe he was aware of the fraudulent contracts and received payments to look the other way." "And the charges against me?" Zara asked, hardly daring to hope. "Considering the circumstances and the corroborating accounts we've gathered, the Army has no interest in pursuing charges against you, Miss Phillips. In fact, we may need your testimony when Whitaker is brought to trial." After the captain left, promising to send word when they would be needed to testify, Zara and Dawson sat in stunned silence. "It's over," Zara finally whispered. "I can't believe it's really over." "You're free," Dawson said. "You can go anywhere, do anything you want now." Zara looked at him, reading the question in his eyes that he hadn't asked aloud. "What if what I want is right here?" The weeks that followed were filled with a tentative new beginning. Whitaker and Buchanan were both arrested, along with several of their associates. The Army, true to Captain Lewis's word, declined to pursue any charges against Zara for the money she had taken. In fact, she was awarded additional compensation as part of the broader case against Whitaker's illegal operations. With her name cleared and money of her own, Zara had choices for the first time in years. She could leave the ranch, perhaps finally pursue her dream of teaching. But as summer turned to fall, she found herself reluctant to consider any future that didn't include Dawson. For his part, Dawson never pressed her about her plans, though she sometimes caught him watching her with a look of quiet longing that matched the ache in her own heart. The matter came to a head on a crisp October evening. Zara had spent the day preserving the last of the garden's bounty, putting up jars of pickled vegetables and apple preserves for the winter ahead. As she worked, she realized she was planning for a future here, at the ranch, without ever having confirmed that was what Dawson wanted. That night after supper, as they sat by the fire, Zara gathered her courage. "I need to ask you something," she said, setting aside her mending. Dawson looked up from the book he'd been reading. "What is it? When all this started, you offered me shelter until I figured out what to do next." Zara met his gaze steadily. "I believe I've figured it out." A flash of something fear perhaps crossed Dawson's face before he carefully masked it. "And what have you decided?" "That depends on you." Zara moved to sit beside him. "If you want me to go, I will, but if you want me to stay—" She took a deep breath. "If you want me to stay, I'd like that very much." The silence that followed seemed endless, but then Dawson set his book aside and took her hands in his. "The day I met you," he said softly, "when I heard Sheriff Buchanan shouting that you were a thief who had lied for money, something inside me whispered that there was more to the story. And then, when I learned the truth, how you had claimed what was rightfully yours despite the risk, I knew you were someone extraordinary." He brought one hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "The truth is, Zara Phillips, from that first day a part of me has been hoping you would choose to stay, not out of necessity or gratitude, but because you wanted to." "I do want to," Zara whispered, her heart beating wildly. "More than anything. Then stay." Dawson's voice was husky with emotion. "Stay and build a life with me. I know it won't always be easy. Ranching is hard work and I'm far from perfect," but Zara silenced him with a kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling. "Is that a yes?" Dawson asked, his eyes bright with happiness. "Yes," Zara replied. 1,000 times yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch, with Captain Lewis serving as witness. As winter settled over the prairie, they began their life together, working side by side to build something neither had dared hope for, a home filled with love and trust. The following spring, when wildflowers carpeted the rolling hills surrounding their ranch, Zara planted a garden twice the size of the previous years. Standing beside her as she mapped out the rows, Dawson wrapped his arms around her waist, his hand resting gently on the slight swell of her belly. "You think we'll have enough room for all this come harvest time?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Zara leaned back against him, covering his hand with hers. "We'll make room. This family is growing, after all." Dawson turned her in his arms, his expression one of wonder. "When were you going to tell me? Today?" Zara smiled up at him. "Happy birthday, Mr. Wade." As Dawson gathered her close, his kiss filled with joy and promise, Zara marveled at how far they had come. From a desperate escape to a future brighter than either could have imagined, their journey had been unexpected but perfect in its own way. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold, Dawson took her hand and pressed a kiss to her wedding ring. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Taking that money and running?" Zara considered the question seriously. "No," she finally said. "It was terrifying and dangerous, but it led me here to you. I wouldn't change that for anything." "Neither would I," Dawson replied, his eyes reflecting the same love that filled her heart. "When the sheriff said you lied for money, I knew there had to be more to the story. But even then, I never imagined finding my future in that moment." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast prairie sky, they remained on the porch, hands entwined, content in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single act of courage and end in a love strong enough to overcome any obstacle the frontier might place in their path.